Okay, let's make a start because I'm sure you're as busy as we are here at iConsys. So thank you so much for joining our session today on maximising site resilience and how site assessments can improve resilience for your plant now and in the long term. So let me introduce myself. I'm Jan Adams. I'm the head of marketing here at iConsys, and I'm joined today by the amazing Leandro Gasparini, who is our director of services, and also a few of our other team are in the background as well today. So, Leandro, thank you for being here. Could I ask you to briefly introduce yourself for those who've not met you before?
Thank you very much, John, and welcome everybody. Yes, my name is Leandro Gasparini. I'm the new Director of Services for iConsys. I joined about 6 months ago, and my background has always been in services for industrial automation, process automation. I worked in that industry for more than 20 years, directly with the end users or customers, to try and make sure we understand what the challenges are and how do we help them. And a pleasure to be here today.
Thanks, Leandro. Right, let's just dive straight in, shall we?
Yes.
So to kick off, could you highlight some of the main issues that arise with site resilience that you've seen over the years?
There are many, many risks that site resilience will bring, or the unknown of site resilience will bring. But if we want to count it with one hand, we can start with an incomplete knowledge regarding assets and where they're actually located and what is their criticality. The second one is, once you're locating those assets, what is the life cycle status that they have? Are they obsolete? Are they mature? Are they about to go obsolete? So that will give a different flavor of the reactivity or the urgency that we need to go and provide some support. The customers need to be aware of, to maintain their operations at peak performance. The third one is about skill shortage and knowledge exodus. We've seen this in the last few years, particularly after COVID. And not many people stay in the same place for many, many, many years. And that we see that changing in the last few decades. What is happening now is that also have people that are very reliable on. And if those people then leave the business, that provide at the worst possible time a big gap and a big risk for businesses. The fourth one is a reputational or financial risk due to unplanned downtime. So we talk about identifying those assets. We identify that, would understand what the life cycle status are for those assets. But when they fail, and it's not a matter of if, but when they fail, are we actually happy to know what will be the impact and how quickly we can recover? But that will have a very big impact on the business, potential environment, or more important, reputational. And then the last one that I can think of is the cost of doing nothing. Many people will ask the question, if his ain't broke, don't fix it, or when was the last time he failed? But when he fails, you will have those unplanned downtime that it will cost you greatly, because not just the downtime that it costs you per hour, but it's all of those associated elements around the value chain as well.
Great. And I've certainly learnt here at iConsys that a site assessment is often the best way to overcome these challenges. And it's how we address things as standard within iConsys. So could you briefly explain what a site assessment is and why it's so critically important for industrial automation sites?
Absolutely. So the site assessment is an independent, or should be an independent, vendor agnostic audit for the entire site automation infrastructure or install base. And you should cover elements of hardware, software, the spares availability, the life cycle status of their assets, an element of a high level of cybersecurity overview, and the staff competency, but it not because of the actual people are being incompetent or not, but it's the reliability and the availability of those people to be very useful to when the situation arises, to fault find, diagnose, and troubleshoot. We know many people have day jobs and they need to produce, and the focus on those to just concentrate on this sometimes is limited. But he also tried to identify the critical business risks. The whole idea of a site resilience is understand where the vulnerabilities are, but more important, what is the impact to the business? This is not a project modernization or an upgrade because some element of technologies are old, but it's an element of what happens if that goes down? What happens if that fails? How quickly I can actually bring it up and running? And what is the impact or criticality to the business if that actually happens? But it also helps the organization plan upgrades, develop the skill set and the personnel that they have on site, and obviously optimize the maintenance strategies that they have. And ultimately, it's all about the visibility that we have, or the customer should have around the install base, what controls we can put in place, and the confidence that they will have on how the operations work and the process and procedures underpins that performance.
Great. So what would you say are the most common risks that you see in automation estates that can make a site assessment not just desirable, but a necessity?
Great question. So we already touched a few of those when we counted in one hand. So it's about hidden obsolescence. So it's identifying those equipments that are either obsolete or approaching that. It will be unsupported system, whether it's a firmware or a hardware or a software, whether it's that not available anymore, or we don't have any more spares anymore, or there is not an element of having the skill set to go and help troubleshoot and fault find, which actually goes into the knowledge gaps or dependencies in a single person, that if that person is not available or he left the business or something else happened, that will have a significant impact, because we would also highlight the criticality of those assets and the impact on the business when it goes down. But we also can't ignore the ineffective spare management process. They have too much spares, or we don't have any at all, or we have the wrong one, or across a fleet of sites, you can probably have duplication of such. And also an increased cybersecurity exposure. If you got outdated systems out there, or there's a lack of focus on cybersecurity, they can have a significant impact on the business should they not be taken into consideration on any plans moving forward.
So how would you recommend uncovering hidden issues that, say, maintenance managers might not be aware of?
So the best way to do that is with a way of a site assessment, which is effectively a structured asset discovery process where we physically install panels, controllers, network topologies, software configuration and backup files, etc., etc. And then we use those to compare with the OEM's lifecycle data. We need to understand what is the lifecycle status, where are they in the roadmap, and what will be the impact that they have. But also to review historical maintenance records. How effective have those assets been maintained? Is it anyone doing anything about them? If there was anything recorded on an issue that it was in, is it anything actually happening and some actions taken on the back of that? We would also have conversations with the staff about what the daily challenges are. How often they normally reveal that is an element of workaround just to keep the plant running, which can actually point to bigger problems, but it doesn't necessarily tackle the root cause of those problems. It's just the way that they normally operate to get those plants to keep producing. All of the above will be benchmarked against industry best practices. One of the things that people will do is they know what is best for them because it worked for them. But if they start going into third parties, the best industry best practices, by working in different segments, by working with different vendors, by working with different customers, they actually can come together to benefit them in an element of, you did not know that this is a better way of doing the same things.
And I'm guessing the answer to my next question is it depends. But in your experience, is a site assessment something a business can undertake itself?
Normally, yes. If you got sufficient in-house capability and capacity to do so, people can undertake this structured approach and have a very proactive life cycle roadmap planning with a very good development program for all of those personnel that they need in order to support their operations. However, there's some benefit of using someone like Iconsys or a third party, because it will provide an independent and credibility to go and house reviews. We know that the people are busy, so maybe you don't have the capacity to do so, and we will be vendor agnostic in order to carry out this assessment. If we go to specific OEMs, some of them will be biased to give you and maintain that. But if the customer's requirements and needs are to standardize, whether it comes from corporate policy or whether it's an element of best practices and efficiency, that independent vendor agnostic approach could actually provide another value. Then obviously is the cross-platform expertise. If you discover on the sites that there's many platforms and the capability to support those platforms has been lost in time, or he lost touch with anyone that he can go supported, the person, a vendor agnostic like ourselves, will provide that element of cross-platform expertise to give value to those customers. And obviously is that structure methodology. We've done this, we've got a proven track record, we're doing this, and we know how to do the assessment, how to produce the report, what recommendations we could do, but more importantly, which is another big element, is an actionable roadmap. we can help you with this. So what? What do we need to do? Once you got the report and once you got those findings and recommendations, we can actually take you all the way and help you to make those a reality and then be in the long term to prove that return on investment.
Okay, so taking our iConsist site assessment process as an example, could you talk through, anyone watching this webinar, the kind of steps that you or they would have to go through to really provide something that's comprehensive and meaningful?
Absolutely. So we're trying to obviously in iConsist to keep it simple. So the first step is to do a pre-assessment briefing. So we need to engage with the right stakeholders and we need to make sure we align on the scope and the priorities that those customers need to tackle. There's no point of just doing a site-wide assessment if they know there's a particular plant area that they need to be focusing on. So we will make sure that it's an alignment prior to their physical site presence to make sure we engage with the right people and we're going to tackle the right things that is an actual challenge or a headache for those customers. The second step is that non-intrusive physical audit of that install base. We're going to have a look at and take notes about the hardware, some software versions, architecture diagrams. If there's any spare inventory on site, we're going to interview the staff to see what the daily challenges they currently have. We will understand the site process and procedures and practices to understand how they normally operate. But one of the key differentiations in all of these is we're going to bring how critical are those particular plant areas or assets in order to focus and give a proactive approach. The third one is we're going to do a life cycle and support readiness review. So which systems are obsolete according to the OEMs, or one of them are about to go in there. The fourth step is about that staff competency evaluation. What are the training needs? How long have they been have a formal training in the past? What is the current operational practice, process, and procedures? How do they benchmark against best practices? Are they relying on single people or a particular subcontractors? So all of those things, there will be an element of risk that we need to make sure that we highlight to our customers for them to take informed decisions. Fifth step is a high-level cybersecurity vulnerability review. We know that obsolescence and very old assets will bring an element of cybersecurity risk, and we want to make sure that those risks are being assessed, that there's any mitigations that have been put in place, and there's anything that is being put in place to sustain those mitigations going forward. And that's an element some people then oversight, they don't pay too much attention, and it is too late, as we've seen recently in the media. Step 6, we do data-driven analysis and creation of a traffic-like risk matrix, right? And it will be clearly highlighting what are the critical areas and priorities to make sure that we give a pragmatical, commonsensical approach on what the recommendations would be. And the 7th step, which is a tailored vendor-agnostic roadmap that it will be presented on a face-to-face meeting to make sure that we gave those recommendations. How do we help take them forward? And then if needed, we can provide indicative costs or an indicative prioritization or a plan on how we would recommend these have been taken forward.
I think the real value there is that roadmap that just provides peace of mind and a clear way forward, which for most people, I think they probably feel like they're drowning under a to-do list. And it's just that, it's that value there, isn't it? I'd love to go into each of those steps in detail, but we're obviously not going to have the time today. I would like to go back to step 2, if that's okay.
Yes.
Because you mentioned about carrying out the assessment without disrupting operations. You know, a lot of our customers either run 24/7, 24/5, 365 operations. So how do you gather that information? What's the best approach on that?
Well, the best word is we need to have that clear engagement with the certain stakeholders. So the first thing is by having those initial discussions, we should schedule during the best possible time that the site would allow this non-intrusive action to take place. Not because there will be an impediment into the process, but you probably need on people, you will probably need site access. So what we need to do is schedule when is the best time for the customers, for anybody to go in and start undertaking this assessment. We need to plan in advance. What are the plant areas that we need to cover? What are the priorities for the customers? What are the challenges? We need to make sure we have safe, secure access to those plant areas and all of the permits and the access of and availability of the times are in place. We will use visual inspections, and where possible, we do a read-only of network scanning or sucking information from software configuration files or backups. We will leverage all of those backups and software configurations, any drawings, any architecture, and any knowledge that we will engage with those site teams to make sure that we take as much as information as possible without touching or disrupting anything that is actually in operations or opening panels. We'd engage with the relevant on-site teams to make sure that it's a safe place to go. And then we ensure that the continuity of the process, and if anything would happen, everyone will be ready to react and it wouldn't be a surprise. And if the live system needs checking at all, we would also coordinate with the production and the safety team to make sure, look, this something is going to happen. Let's put some risk in place that normally shouldn't happen, but it's better to plan than just to be sorry.
Absolutely. So that's all great in terms of the theoretical process and that kind of thing. But I think it'd be useful to give maybe a few real world examples where a site assessment has improved site resilience. Have you got anything you could share?
Of course, in the many years that I've been working in this industry, we've done many of these things. And I can pick 3 examples top of my head. So the first one was about a food manufacturing site. We found after doing a site assessment that 40% of the PLCs were in obsolete life cycle status. They have no space available and they were posing a downtime risk. So what we did with our particular customer is we'll help them do a phase upgrade project based on the priorities that we took around those particular plant areas or assets without any unplanned downtime and avoiding any costly downtimes, okay? By planning ahead of time and there's a production availability, we put a particular engineering solution, which we normally do in Iconsis as a pedigree, and we narrow it down, that downtime or that switch over to make sure that it fits the production schedule. Second one was around a pulp and paper plant. There was no space whatsoever for key assets, and they were solely relying on one key person to do that support. So what we did is we make sure that we added some spare management strategy around that site. We can provide an element of repair option should any one of those fails and it cannot be sourced anyway. And then we prevented a potential 8-hour shutdown because those spares were readily available due to a quick swap over. And on the back of that, the customer then value having a 24/7, 365 support contract to make sure they have a quick call out SLA response to site, to be able to troubleshoot and fault find and make sure that those spares are being readily available and maintained. So when they need it, the LED will go green when they swap over. And then the last one was around an energy site. There was an unsecured engineering laptop with a very outdated antivirus, and it has very uncontrolled access by site personnel and contractors. So every time anything needed to happen on site, any software modifications, configurations, or even backup to do pre-planned maintenance visits, that laptop was reporting around, connecting to different plant areas. And it was absolutely a risk on cybersecurity because the antivirus was very old and the people using that laptop was no control access at all. And the software, it can be downloaded. So that posed a risk. So what we did, we put a risk assessment and a risk management process in place to make sure that that laptop was properly maintained by the correct antivirus software, and it's a proper process and procedures of who can get access to that laptop to then have a control access to those systems.
Wow, great examples. It seems to me, I mean, obviously I sit in marketing, my own little bubble away from the engineering teams, but it seems that like obsolescence risk, spares management risk, and cyber risk are these sort of things that can just organically creep up over time. And I guess that site assessment is just that putting a mirror up to actually what's going on and then providing that route forward. So obviously I did a bit of research for the webinar and I found some quite hairy stats, which I thought I'd share with both you and our audience. So according to IDS Indata's 2025 projections on industrial downtime, the heavy equipment and industrial manufacturing sector exhibits the following characteristics. So its average downtime frequency is 23 hours a month. That just blows my mind anyway, which approximately 2 or 3 of those are major events in the year. The duration per incident for a business is 5 hours plus, which again is frightening if you're 24/7. And the average cost per hour of downtime, and I can't get my head around this, is between £150,000 and £300,000 per hour. When I think about JLR at the minute, for example, and that's in my head, and I just think of the money involved, it scares me, and I'm not a decision maker. So that means hundreds of thousands, if not millions plus, lost to avoidable downtime. Does that line up with what you see in industry?
Yes, it tallies very much with what I've seen in the past. It does vary greatly between sectors, but anything from about 10 to 15,000 pounds per hour up to 300,000 pounds per hour isn't uncommon. The worst thing of this is, and why this is so long and that's what is so costly, is because of the unknown hidden risks that customers don't see today. Because A, they haven't seen it, or it hasn't failed in the last few years, or we got a person that he knows how to do a quick workaround until it fails, and it fails catastrophically. So then you're going to have no spares, you got nothing to buy because it's completely obsolete, and we don't have the skill sets to go and fault find, troubleshoot, and diagnose, and then bring the system modifications to bring them up and running. So those costs per hours is not easy to justify how much is that? But if you put the down costs, plus the raw materials, plus the value chain impact, plus the cost of the projects to bring all of that into the latest and greatest technology to keep up and running, it normally completely overruns, and the return on investment is very easily justifiable, which is what we mentioned before. The cost of doing nothing could easily be justified with an independent report to say, if this happened, that will be this cost, knowing on the cost per hour. But if we put an investment and we plan ahead on particular downtimes or planned downtimes, that is, A, could be easily justifiable, B, could be easy to implement, and those risks are completely mitigated, and the return on investment is easy quantifiable.
Yeah. So linked to that, I'm going to ask you the impossible question, all about our favourite acronym, ROI. What kind of ROI can sites expect from investing in a site assessment?
As an English say, how long is a piece of string? What we could do is that a few areas that we can definitely measure success or return on investment. So the first one is the reduced unplanned downtime, okay? That's the biggest cost saver ever, the cost of doing nothing, okay? One of the big things that we could do is what we said, how much it costs you per hour. And if you got the average downtime in the month, that will be 2 or 3 days, depending on your production. That could significantly, justify knowing what the risks are, put a plan in place, and then budget it to make sure that those downtimes are actually planned or around production schedule. Then you're going to have the second area, which is better space utilization. If we have an element of visibility of where those critical assets are, where those spares are, and if you've got a fleet of sites where it can actually apply those spares, not just on a 1-to-1 ratio, it will be less capital tidy up per site, and it will be few emergency orders that you need to go and find out. And we can probably call it in gray areas. It's not going to be the official market or official sources where you can go and get this hardware, but it will be less trustworthy sources, shall we say. The other one will be an extended life cycle of your operations. If we start implementing those plans and those roadmaps that as part of the recommendations from an asset and the knowledge support point of view, you can actually make sure that your operations are at peak performance, and anything that it needs to swap over of a change, it will be planned, and you know where the risks are. And if anything happened, you know how to go and mitigate those risks very, very quickly with the right spares, with the right knowledge, with the right partner. Obviously, it's the low life cycle roadmap planning that enables the budgeting side of those things to be much better controlled. It's a very common practical sense to make sure that that evergreen platform is not going to be upgrading for the sake of upgrading, but it will be that pragmatic approach that we upgrade in those critical areas to make sure that those spares are released for the next phase. And we don't do it just because things are old, but we're doing it with a pragmatic approach. And that budgeting could be across many years, because that life cycle roadmap planning could then be planned rather than emergency reactions. Some of sites, because you have those maintenance and you have less unplanned time and your risks profile is lower, the insurance premiums in some sectors will actually go down. And the last one, which is very hard to quantify, but peace of mind. One of the things that many people know is if you got visibility, you got control, you got a plan, in your head, hopefully some people will sleep better at night knowing that all of those things have been taken care of and is being proactively managed rather than reactive.
So almost rather than fixating on the cost of the site assessment, it's more what's the overall cost of not doing it and what's the peace of mind that it could bring you. And we know from experience that from the vast majority of our customers, the cost of the assessment would be less than an hour of downtime anyway. So when you look at it in that sense, it's like almost a no-brainer really, isn't it?
Correct.
So, yeah. Okay, well, let's look at what happens after the site assessment. Great, you've got an assessment. But what do you do now? How do you support sites in acting on those recommendations? I know you've touched on it before during the talk, but if you could bring that together, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely fine. So once there's a recommendation and there's a report in front of people, then they can do their request. It's depending on their requirements, it depending on their capabilities, and it depends what they want to achieve. But one of the things that Iconsis can provide is a phased, budget-friendly, and practical implementation plans. Our business model is not to provide a report and walk away. This is not just a consultative services portion. We want to be there for the long journey with our customers. We want to make sure that we are there to implement those recommendations and be a trusted partner for those customers for the long run. And then we will help them justify that return on investment or validate that return on investment moving forward based on criticality, based on the reduction of that unplanned downtime, and not just on life cycle status. We want to try and help ensure that those parts, some of them are obsolete and very difficult to obtain, but we can actually help source those parts. We can actually manage those projects and those upgrades. We can help coordinate the installation and commissioning across multi-vendors if that's the decision that the customer has taken, and across various technologies that we can also help with should the customer, A, that's the decision that they want to take, B, if they have the skill set in-house or not to make sure that that is a success. Which then takes to the next point. We can then help deliver and upskill the in-house people or competencies to make sure that they could be self-sufficient should that be the ways that they wish to go for. We will address any competency gaps or any trainings that we need to do based on the new technologies and projects and assets that is just being deployed on site. And obviously, we would love to be your long-term service contract partners, and we will provide a support contract to help manage that system in the long term. That evergreen is not going to come overnight. It will be a long life cycle roadmap planning that we would love to work with those customers to make sure that we help them realize the initial value. And also, we want to help with follow-up assessments as we go across the life cycle to make sure that that initial assessment and the value that they hopefully achieved is actually repeated year after year.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been here a few years now. Our 4 company values are people, partnership, quality, and innovation. I passed the test. The partnership one particularly, I always thought that was talking about our platform independence, that we partner with all the main technology providers. But actually, it's so much more than that. And it's very much about how we partner internally to make sure we deliver seamless projects and services. But also, it is how we partner with our customers. And I absolutely love that about Iconsis, just how much it is very much about partnering with rather than just delivering something to. And I think that's something Iconsis should be rightly proud about. So final question from me, and then we'll flip over to questions that I've had in advance from people unable to attend today. So what's the best way for maintenance managers to prepare before booking an assessment?
Good question. So like we discussed before, those early engagements are key to make sure that this process runs as smoothly as possible. But more importantly, the customer get what they want out of this process. So if we got any information, gather any asset register that they may have, any diagrams, any architecture diagrams, any software configuration files or backup files, then it should involve the right people on site, whether it's maintenance, whether it's operations, IT or OT, if it's relevant, as early as possible to secure their availability. We know people are busy. We will then ask them to identify if they have known problems or challenges or a particular plant area or sites that they would like to prioritize and focus on as the first step. This is not let's boil the ocean approach. This is a very pragmatic, where do you want to start this journey? we ask them to plan for access to those equipment rooms or control cabinets or server rooms or control rooms to make sure that the permits are in place, the people are available, and they're expecting this visit to happen. And obviously, we will ask them to choose the best time to secure access to the plant, reduce any risk for anything happening at the time, and it should be around the production schedule to make sure that if anything happens, which it shouldn't, it minimizes the risk. But we want to work with them when it's best for them, whether it's on a weekend, whether it's late in the day. We could be flexible enough to make sure that it fits their schedule rather than ours.
Great. Well, you'll be delighted to know, Leandro, that concludes my personal grilling of you. So over now to audience questions. We did have quite a few people contact us to say that they couldn't make it today, as always happens with live events. But we had some questions from them, if you're happy to
Absolutely,
go through
please.
those. So again, I know the answer is going to be, it depends. How often should a site assessment be done?
Well, the answer will not be, it depends, but the answer should be regularly. So we discussed what the process is. We discussed the value that it needs to go to provide clear visibility of those hidden obsolescence risks. We provide visibility of what the critical impact they might have into the business. We will provide visibility of how solely reliable on single individuals, or that individual is spread too thin, or we lost that knowledge and you need to start relying on somebody else. So what we said is, the first one is done, you don't want to do it, and then 5 years down the line, you're going to end up in the same situation. This needs to be done regularly. And that regularly, again, could be tailored to the customer needs. If the first assessment was done on a particular plant area or a particular site, we would recommend that after the initial recommendations are done and after that return on investment has been hopefully quantified and actually realized, would then move into another plant area or another site, or potentially we would focus on another element of the risk assessment. It could be cyber for the next step. First thing is, for example, understand the obsolescence and address it. And the next thing, we'll start putting an element of cybersecurity around those as well. But it should be regular, whether it is once a year, whether it is once every 2 years, but it depends on what the scope was to start with. It could be across the entire site, across different sites, across different elements. But it should be done regularly. You don't want to take a picture and move on. This should be a camera and a video that you continually address and make sure that your life cycle roadmap and your risks are mitigated continuously.
Okay, next question I think we've largely covered, but it was from a contact in the metals industry, just said, we've got ABB, Siemens and Rockwell kit on site mainly. Are you able to work with multi-technology platform environments?
100%. I mean, the clue is in our name. Independent control systems, ICONSYS. So the whole idea is, we found this on many, many customers. There's been an element that every time there's an OEM coming in here and deploying an element machine, for example, in the process, or they've been acquired other businesses, or they have expansion into the plant and the particular strategy within the headquarters has changed, we tend to find that every time we go to site, there's multi-vendor assets deployed, I would like to say consistently, but it isn't, across entire site or an element of sites. That's where we come in. Not only we can go and understand what those technologies are, we can understand the life cycle is, but we can also help in the project and modernization, and more importantly, in the support of those things, including spare management, to make sure that should the customer decide that they want to retain it, because the cost of changing platforms within their operations could also be an element of cost that they need to consider. But if it has a strategy coming from headquarters or a corporate agreement with an agreed vendor or an OEM, we will be happily working with them to fit their requirements. But yes, we can go across multi-vendor, across platform, across sites.
Okay, that's great. Final question. This is from a maintenance manager who's got 5 plants that he's overseeing. And I know the answer is going to be it depends, possibly. But he's considering whether to get someone to do a site assessment for him or to undertake site assessments himself. How long does a typical site assessment take?
So again, within ICONSYS, we're trying to keep things simple. What we normally said is, based on this structured approach that we actually have proven and tested, we would go and assess around typically 10 panels per day. So if a person wants to do 30 panels as the first initial step, we would recommend that it's going to be 3 days on site. And typically it would take less time in the office to prepare the report and go back to site and present those recommendations. But if we take 30 panels, we will be on site about 3 days, and there will be a couple of days back in the office to make sure we gather all the data, we crunch those data, we provide actually data-driven recommendations back to the customer, presented on a face-to-face meeting back to them. That's roughly how we're going to go around. And then that would depend where the site is located and the typical access you're going to have that. But on an average, that's what we said it would take.
Fantastic. Thank you, Leandro. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. I think few of my main takeaways about site resilience is that risks exist even in very well-run sites. They can creep in from all corners. And that a structured independent audit would give visibility and control and credibility for the board, most importantly. And that sort of traffic light assessment report that we would produce and that roadmap turning findings into actionable improvements, as opposed to a wish list that never quite gets done, makes it easier to prioritise and enable budgeting.
Correct.
Excellent. I passed the test. So thank you all so much for your time this morning. We hope you've taken away some useful insights to instigate some internal conversations. We will send you all an email after today with a link to the recording should you wish to revisit it. And we would also really welcome any feedback, as this is the first webinar that we've held this year, and we obviously want to make them bigger and better as we go along. We will contact you as well, very informally, just to see if you've got any follow-up questions, because sometimes there's a bit of resistance of putting them up during a live webinar. And also just to see whether you want to see what a sample site assessment report would look like.
Yes.
So thank you for attending, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you, Leandro, for your time.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending.
Over and out, everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye.